By the time the first real sandstorm hit Sunset Ridge, the HOA's prized minimalist desert aesthetic looked like someone had put a design magazine inside a blender full of dirt. From my living room window, I watched a wall of dust roll over the subdivision like the sky had just given up on color entirely. The blue turned to brown in about 30 seconds flat. The wind slammed into the houses hard. Gravel ripped out of designer yards and pinged against stucco like hail. Street lights vanished into the murk. The cul-de-sac turned into a swirling funnel of tan chaos. Through the dust, I spotted her. Deborah Langford, HOA president, in a visor naturally, staggering down the sidewalk, clutching a stack of neon violation notices in one hand and what looked like a yard tool in the other. She actually tried to fight a sandstorm with a leaf blower. I could barely hear her screaming something about trash cans before a gust hit and the tickets exploded out of her hand, vanishing into the brown blur like confetti at the world's worst party. A tumbleweed rolled past her, the size of a small car, bouncing right over the bare stretch where a thick green belt of mesquite and desert willow used to stand. That green belt had been the only thing between Sunset Ridge and the open desert. The thing Deborah had bulldozed 6 weeks earlier because it looked messy. Now, as emergency alerts chimed on my phone, visibility dropped to nothing, and sand piled in drifts up to car doors, I couldn't help thinking that she'd wanted clean lines and no trees. Congratulations, Debbie. You finally matched the surface of Mars. Before Sunset Ridge turned into a live sandblasting booth, life was simple for me. I'm in my mid-30s, work as a GIS analyst from home in my cul-de-sac lot backing up to what the brochure had called a natural green belt buffer along the desert. The builders had left a 50-foot wide strip of native vegetation between the neighborhood wall and the open scrub. Mesquite, palo verde, ironwood, brittlebush, creosote. It looked a little wild and shaggy, sure, but it shaded the backyards, soaked up storm runoff, and most importantly in Arizona, stopped the desert floor from just jumping into your lungs. I loved it. I'd drink coffee on my back patio, listening to quail chirp and watching sunlight filter through actual leaves, while the rest of Sunset Ridge obsessed over desert modern curb appeal and what color of beige was currently trending. Then the old HOA board term limited out. Enter Deborah Langford, self-styled community modernization advocate, actually just a control freak with a design blog addiction and a hatred of anything that shed leaves where she could see them. She stormed into the HOA presidency like she'd been sworn in on a stack of lifestyle magazines. Her platform was no more scruffy unmanaged spaces, unified visual branding for all streets, and maximizing property values through aesthetic consistency. She was the kind of woman who said brand about a cul-de-sac and meant it. The green belt behind my house? Deborah called it the weedy ditch. To me, it was a windbreak and wildlife corridor. To her, it was a problem to be solved by rock and a vision board. It started with an email blast titled Green Belt Improvement Initiative with cactus and sparkle emojis that made my eye twitch. In cheerful font, the HOA announced removal of overgrown brush in the common area greenbelt, installation of decorative gravel, boulders, and statement palms, and new minimalist fencing to clean up the view for perimeter homes. I replied within 5 minutes. Hi, this is the homeowner from Lot 47. The overgrown brush is native desert vegetation that acts as a windbreak and dust barrier. Pretty sure some of it's under a conservation easement in the CC and RS and the city plat. Happy to share documents. Deborah responded 14 hours later, carbon copying the whole board. Thanks for your passion for weeds. The green belt is common HOA property and subject to board discretion. Our landscapers have assured us this will reduce maintenance and improve sightlines. We've got this, with a smiley face. Within a week, orange survey flags appeared throughout the green belt. Landscapers with chainsaws showed up at dawn. I got my first yard non-compliance notice for letting vegetation encroach into common area where a single brittlebush had dared lean over the block wall. I went to the next HOA meeting armed with printed CC and RS, city plat maps, and a highlighted copy of the native open space easement the developer had recorded. I waded through 40 minutes of discussion about mailbox paint, then raised my hand. The green belt is technically a protected buffer zone, I said calmly. There's an easement recorded with the city. It exists to prevent dust and erosion from the open desert. You can't just bulldoze it because you don't like leaves. Deborah smiled the way people smile in documentaries right before things go very wrong for them. We appreciate your research, she said with forced sweetness, But the board consulted a landscaper and he said it's fine. What landscaper? I asked. She beamed. My cousin's company. Langford Outdoor Visions. Of course. And you saw the line in the CC and RS about preserving native vegetation along the eastern buffer? I pressed. We also saw the line about board authority over common areas, she said in that syrupy tone. And as president, I'm telling you we're refreshing the space. Homebuyers don't want to stare at scraggly trees. They want clean, modern lines. Trees are kind of the opposite of clean, modern lines, a neighbor muttered. Deborah shot them a look that could curdle stucco. We have a vision, she declared. Over the next few weeks, I received 3 more violation notices for unauthorized watering because my drip line occasionally dampened the dirt near the wall. Deborah sent an email warning homeowners not to interfere with scheduled beautification work. Stakes went up along the green belt with signs reading improvement area. Do not enter. I started recording everything. Photos of the trees, screenshots of emails, video of the surveyors. If there was one thing I trusted more than the HOA, it was documentation. The bulldozers came on a Tuesday, because of course they did. By 7 a.m., a crew of guys in neon vests was taking chainsaws to 20-year-old mesquite trees while Deborah stood nearby in a floppy hat, sipping iced coffee and taking progress pics on her phone. I stood at the back wall, filming. Hey. I called over the engine noise. You got a permit from the city for this? One of the workers shrugged. Lady said it's HOA common area. She signed the work order. I sent the video to the city's planning and environmental department with a short note. Hi, pretty sure my HOA is tearing out a recorded native buffer zone without permits. Attaching plat map, easement, and video. An auto-reply said they'd review it within 10 business days. By the end of that one business day, the entire length of the green belt behind Sunset Ridge was gone. The crew scraped everything bare. No trees. No shrubs. Just raw, pale dirt baking in the sun. Within a week, the improvements went in. Bright white gravel that reflected sunlight like a mirror. A few sad queen palms that did absolutely nothing for wind. A minimalist cable fence that might, on a good day, stop a determined chihuahua. The first dust devil that danced through the gap made it obvious what they'd done. Where the green belt used to break the wind, a narrow spinning column of sand now tore straight into my yard, blasting my patio furniture and coating everything in grit. I filmed that too. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the city. Mr. Reyes, thank you for your report. It appears your HOA has removed vegetation within a designated native open space area and altered a recorded windbreak buffer without an approved plan. We are opening an enforcement case and conducting a site inspection. I clicked the weather app out of habit. The summer forecast had just updated. First major dust event projected in 3 to 5 days. I sighed, looking out over the blinding white gravel strip where trees used to stand. Cool, I muttered. Guess we run the stress test now. The sandstorm did not arrive politely. It rolled in on a 112-degree afternoon, big enough to make the local news chopper detour. People in Phoenix were posting sunset pictures of the wall of dust swallowing the skyline. In Sunset Ridge, it was less social media, more apocalypse. With the green belt gone, the neighborhood went from slightly windy to open your front door and lose it forever. I watched from my window as sand skated across the scraped-open strip, hit the flimsy fence, and vaulted straight into the subdivision. Dust blasted down the formerly pristine streets in sheets, piling in drifts against curbs and garage doors. Gravel from HOA-approved front yards became shrapnel, pinging off cars and windows. The storm lasted 20 minutes. The aftermath lasted a lot longer. When the dust finally settled, half the neighborhood's pools looked like chocolate milk. SC units wheezed, choked with grit. Decorative rock had migrated in dunes across driveways. Several houses on the windward edge had literal sand drifts against their stucco, knee-high. Deborah sent out an email titled Unscheduled Weather Event, cleanup reminders with a wind emoji. She actually tried to issue violations for excess debris in driveways the next morning. That same morning, 3 white city vehicles rolled slowly along the now almost buried main road and stopped by the former green belt. 2 inspectors in city polos stepped out, clipboards in hand, eyes very, very narrow. I met them at the back wall, printouts in hand like I'd been waiting for this my entire life. Before the HOA improvements, we never got dust like this, I said, showing them photos. Before and after, video of the bulldozers, the survey flags, the dust devil test run. The native vegetation broke the wind. Now it's just a ramp. The inspectors walked the length of the gravel strip, taking notes and photos. One pointed to the plat map I'd brought. This clearly shows a designated native open space easement, he said, and a windbreak buffer required as part of the original subdivision approval. The other flipped through the folder. And there are no approved modification plans on file. Behind them, a neighbor was using a literal snow shovel to clear sand off his driveway. Deborah appeared at the far end of the block, marching over in a visor and mask, clearly ready to manage the situation. "Good morning," she called out brightly. "Can I help you gentlemen with anything? I'm the HOA president." The closer inspector didn't even look up. "You're also the contact name on the unpermitted vegetation removal complaint," he said flatly. "We'll have some questions." Within a week, the city issued a notice of violation to the HOA for destruction of protected native open space and alteration of required windbreaks. A separate report went to the county air quality department for contributing to fugitive dust emissions during a regional dust event. The HOA's insurance company started asking pointed questions about unapproved changes to common area landscaping that increased exposure to wind damage. Deborah's emails lost a lot of emojis after that. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. By 6:40, the Sunset Ridge Clubhouse was full of sunburned, dust-choked homeowners clutching photos of their sand-filled pools and filter repair bills. I sat near the back, a neat folder of documents in my lap. The top page was the city's violation notice. The second was a very interesting letter from the HOA's own insurance carrier. Deborah took her place at the front, attempting her usual "I'm totally in control of everything" posture. It didn't land quite as well with a faint dust tan line around her sunglasses. "Let's begin with a brief update on the storm cleanup," she said. A hand shot up. It belonged to Ryan from Lot 32, whose newly painted house now looked like it had survived a sandblaster convention. "Before that," he said firmly, "can you explain why our insurance company says they might not cover dust damage because the board knowingly removed a windbreak required by the original site plan?" Murmurs rolled through the room. Deborah forced a laugh. "There's been some miscommunication about that letter." I stood up. "I can read it," I offered. "It's pretty clear." I walked to the front, the room parting for me like everyone suddenly remembered I'd been yelling about the green belt for months. I read aloud. "Due to the HOA's unapproved removal of required native buffer vegetation and alteration of the subdivision's windbreak, our client may be found to have materially increased the risk of dust-related property damage. As such, certain claims may be denied or subject to subrogation against responsible parties, including board members who authorized the work." I looked up. "That last part means they might go after the people who signed the contract." Personally. Every eye in the room turned to Deborah. "That landscaper told us it was fine," she snapped. "And the before and after pictures look so much cleaner." "Clean," someone repeated, gesturing out the window. Everyone looked. Even days after the storm, the streets still wore a faint beige film. The minimalist greenbelt was a scoured, lifeless strip radiating heat back into the homes. A city inspector sitting in the back cleared her throat. "As noted in our report, the removal of vegetation violated your native open space easement," she said professionally. "The HOA will be required to restore the green belt with approved species and may be fined for noncompliance. Continued dust issues will increase those penalties." "How much?" a homeowner asked nervously. "Mid-5 figures to start," she said. "More if you drag your feet." Someone whistled. The HOA's lawyer, who looked like he'd aged a decade since the dust storm, folded his hands. "Additionally," he said with obvious dread, "there is potential board liability. Approving unpermitted work in a protected area, ignoring documented objections and relevant CC&R clauses." "I am the board," Deborah snapped. "You all elected me to make hard decisions. I made one." The vice president, who up until that moment had served mostly as a decorative name on the ballot, finally spoke. And that decision buried our streets in sand and blew up our insurance, he said. Motion to remove Deborah Langford as president for gross negligence and violation of fiduciary duty to the association. It was like someone had yelled free tacos. Hands went up so fast several people almost dislocated shoulders. Seconded, someone barked. All in favor? The vice president said. A forest of hands shot up. Opposed? Only Deborah's hand remained raised, alone. Motion passes, he said with satisfaction. Effective immediately, Deborah is removed from the board. She sputtered. You can't. You also signed the Langford Outdoor Visions contract, the lawyer added. The one paying your cousin's company above market rates to bulldoze protected habitat. You might want to get your own attorney. The room buzzed with a mix of anger and something very close to satisfaction. The vice president turned to me. You've been documenting this from the beginning, right? He asked. I held up my neat folder. Every email, every bulldozer, every dust devil. Congratulations, the lawyer said dryly. You just became Exhibit A in about 3 different cases. The lawsuit shook out about how you'd expect. The HOA's insurance subrogated part of the dust damage costs against her cousin's company and, by extension, against her for approving the contract in violation of easements. The city fined her personally for signing off on unpermitted work in a protected area. $45,000. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board in the county for 10 years. When they read the judgment, Deborah's face went white, then red, then something close to purple. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. 45,000, she repeated in a strangled whisper. 10 years. The judge looked at her over his glasses without sympathy. You approved the destruction of a legally protected environmental buffer that resulted in property damage across an entire subdivision, he said. You're fortunate this is a civil matter. The fines and restrictions stand.